Hello everyone and welcome to the first game we'll be covering from this year's Norway Chess. It's Alireza Firouzja versus Magnus Carlsen, and Norway Chess this year it's a 6-player double round robin featuring some very strong players like these two, Firouzja and Carlsen. Also Sergei Karyakin will be playing Yanni Pomnishi, so the World Chess Championship challenger will also have a nice clash between Magnus and Nepo at some point. Richard Rapport and of course Arjan Tari, the second Norwegian that's playing in this tournament. So it's a double round robin, like I said, 10 rounds of classical chess, which means 2 hours for all moves, and they do get an increment, but only starting from move 40, and the increment is 10 seconds per move. And as an extra incentive for this tournament, for a win, you don't get the usual 2 points, but actually you get 3 points. So winning is much preferred than just drawing games. So that being said, let's check it out. This is the first one that we're covering, and already we have a very nice surprise starting as of move 7. So Alireza with the white pieces opens with e4. We have c5. Magnus goes for his usual Sicilian. We have knight to f3, knight to c6, and the bishop to b5, going for the Nimzovich-Rossolimo attack. We have e6 by Magnus, and here we have castles by Firouzja. Knight g to e7. The knight is going to the usual g6 square. Rook to e1, and now knight to g6. We have c3, making preparation for that, the d4 push in the center, and Magnus grabs the center by playing d5. So every Sicilian player's dream. And now there are some games in the database where just e captures and d5 was played. Also queen to a4 is a known move, but here Alireza starts with h4, and it is now, like I said, already as of move 7 that we have a completely new game, and the Magnus has to evaluate this very carefully. No doubt that this has been extensively prepared. So one thing it does, well, other than grabbing more space on the king side, it's preparing h5, which will dislodge the knight, and you're going to have to figure out where the knight will go to. If you go to f4, then you can play d4, maybe open up an attack with the bishop. So it's definitely a question. You can't go to e5 because just captures. This knight will not be able to help out. It's pinned. So Magnus has to figure out how to go about this. And while you could go for something like d captures on e4, then we have rook captures on e4, and now well, how do you continue? There's no good way of challenging this rook here. You might continue bishop to d6, but then white can just trade. For example, captures, play d3, and white is very happy. He doubled black's pawns here. Yes, black does have the bishop pair, but Magnus would probably be able to handle this. However, he decides to see what Firouzja really has prepared, and he just plays a6. He says, all right, I'm very interested in your h4 move, but first I'm going to challenge the bishop. And now do you go back with something like bishop e2, unlikely, bishop to f1, or do you just capture on c6? And Firouzja spent quite a lot of time here, as this is a classical game, before deciding to really capture that knight on c6. So bishop captures on c6, b captures, and now advancing the pawn as planned with h5. So Magnus goes to f4, not worried about this d4 idea, so Alireza just plays it. He played d4 here, but there were some other very interesting options. For example, e captures on d5 runs into knight to d3, attacking the rook here, and once you move the rook, let's say rook e3, now we can capture the bishop, and now we get this very exciting position where the queen could capture on a1, on c1, but even better is queen to a4, threatening queen captures on c6. So now queen captures on d5, and now knight to a3. Now this knight will fall, and white will just have a very comfortable game. If you try and save it with knight to d3, then you run into trouble after rook captures on d3. For example, queen captures on c6 with check, and now after the queen goes back, we are gonna pick up the rook on a8. So queen captures on a8, and now we might see a queen trade here. For example, queen b7, captures, and you get this position where Magnus would have 2 bishops against 2 knights, but he has 3 pawn islands. Alireza has 2, so it's it's a very tricky position to play. The engine prefers white, but it's hard to say what would happen here. So Alireza, instead of something like this, goes for d4 right away, opens up an attack against the knight. Magnus claims the h5 pawn, and now knight to e5, putting pressure on the c6 pawn, and Magnus says, nope, not a problem. Oh, of course, the queen also attacks the knight on h5, so knight back to f6, and now queen to a4. If you go and hurry up and gobble up the pawn with knight captures captures on c6. It's not a very important pawn. It's a double c pawn. You just help black develop. We're going to play queen to c7. And now what do you play? You can't really go back with the knight. You're going to have to play e captures on d5. We're going to play knight captures on d5. And now you can play knight back to e5, for example. And black doesn't have a worry in the world. You can easily develop your dark square bishop. The light square bishop will have this beautiful diagonal. So no worries for black here. So after knight to f6, we have queen to a4, now putting more pressure on c6, and Magnus plays bishop to d7. He says, alrighty, if you want to capture it, you're gonna have to do it some other way. So bishop to g5, Firouzja continues playing actively, developing pieces, and the bishop to e7. Magnus just, naturally developing pieces, saying, let's see what you have. So knight captures on d7, we have queen captures on d7, and now e5, grabbing more space in the center, forcing the knight to move. And now, while you could go to e4, Magnus just goes back, knight to g8, and now he wants to capture the bishop with the knight, and then he's going to have the f5 square available for his knight. So bishop captures on e7, knight captures, and now d captures on c5, grabbing back the pawn. But now queen to b7. Magnus goes after this b2 pawn, and now b4. Immediately we have a5, and it's a very tricky move because you could capture on a5, but it only brings trouble for you. For example, b captures on a5. We're going to play queen to b2, attacking the rook, and now white only has knight to a3, but it's not all that impressive. Queen captures on c3. The a5 pawn is attacked twice. We're attacking the c5 pawn. We already have a pass to d pawn, and if something like a6, trying to keep an eye on this pawn, it's quite a forced variation. Queen captures on c5. We're going to attack the queen. Now we're going to move the queen, attack the pawn twice again. Now we're going to play rook captures on c6, trying to get knight captures and queen captures with check. Black would play queen to d7, now attacking the rook twice. Rook a to c1, doubling up here, and now just knight captures on c6. We would have a queen trade, for example, captures, captures, and captures, and you get this position where white is down the exchange, but he kind of has a very dangerous pawn on a6. All in all, black should not have a lot of trouble defending this. For example, king to d7 attacks the rook, rook d6, check, king e7, and now if knight to b5, now what do you play here? Well, you bring the other rook into the game. Of course, you're going to play rook h to d8, trying to get the trade in, rook to b6, and now, only now do we play rook to b8. Now, forcing a trade, the knight is on b5, and after something like captures, a7, rook to a8 easily stops the pawn, and there is really no hope for white here. So this is, of course, with perfect play, but the idea stands. So Alireza goes back, queen to b3. Now he wants some a4, maybe b5 action in the future. And Magnus just castles. We have castles here, and now knight to d2. Continuing development, and Alireza spent quite a lot of time in this opening, considering he's the one who prepared h4. He's already down to 29 minutes on the clock, whereas Magnus has some 1 hour and 10 minutes on the clock. And here we have queen to a6. So what do you play here? Well, an interesting try would definitely be a4, like we mentioned. Then maybe preparing b5 to get a pass pawn in. Black would play something like rook f to b8, and the game continues. But Alireza has a different plan. He just continues with knight to f3. Now the knight is coming to d4, going to put pressure on that weak c6 pawn, and Magnus just offers a queen trade. So queen to c4, and now Alireza didn't spend a lot of time here, but Magnus kind of did. Alireza only spent like 1 minute, whereas Magnus is now down to 55 minutes. So after considering the position for some time, Alireza decided to trade queens, as there really isn't anything better. We have d captures, and now rook to e4, going after that c4 pawn. Magnus captures on b4, we have c captures on b4, and now rook to a4, preparing to double up on the a file. Firouzja picks up the c4 pawn, and now rook f to a8. So now you will win this pawn, there's no question about it. And now knight to d4. Now kind of paralyzing this knight, because if you move it, the c6 pawn falls. So here we have a nice capture fest. Rook captures on a2, rook captures, and now b5. threatening to create a pass pawn here. So Magnus has to trade, and now we play knight captures on b5, and this is the resulting position. Alireza and Magnus equal in material, both a rook, a knight, and 4 pawns, but Alireza has a passed c pawn. So how can Magnus prevent this pawn from advancing? Well, knight to c6. It's important to block the pawn. We have knight to d4, now offering a trade, and now knight captures on d4. We have rook captures, and now I know you guys really want to put a rook behind the passed pawn, but if you do this, then the rook to d8 is checkmate. So we have to do something about that first. Magnus plays king to f8, and only now we have c6 by Firouzja. You might again be thinking, why not rook to c4? There's nothing wrong with it. The rook definitely deserves to be behind the passed pawn, but it's not nothing dangerous. Let's say king e7, c6, we're gonna block the pawn, king d8, c7 check, king c8, and now you could attack those kingside pawns. For example, g6, rook to f4. Okay, you will win this pawn, but just rook to c2, and black is very happy here. Rook captures on f7, rook captures on c7, rook f6 going after the pawn, just king d7, and again equal material. There will be no winners here. So instead, after this king to f8, we have c6 right away by Alireza, and now rook to c2. We have rook to d8 with check, king to e7, and now rook to d7 with check, as Carlsen's king cannot go anywhere other than the back rank, and you have to go to e8. If you go to f8, then you lose the game. Of course, c7, and there's no defense. Check followed by queening is coming. So of course Magnus played king to e8, and Alireza just played rook to c7, and it was in this position on move 35 that they agreed to a draw, as there is nothing to be done here, and they both know it. So let me just check something really quickly. There we go. Just a second. Yeah, that's it. It really was in this position that they drew the game. I stopped watching the live coverage, and then maybe a few more moves were played, but they weren't. This is where they ended the game, and as this is a double round robin, they will face each other again. Magnus will have the white pieces, and we'll see if Firouzja will be able to defend with black. But I know you guys are waiting for a very specific round, so to tell you which round that will be, Carlsen is playing against Niepo in round 4, and then again, of course, in round 8. So just as I know, this is the clash that all of you are waiting for. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Alireza tried preparing something very special with that new move, h4. Magnus defended well. There really wasn't anything going on there. We've seen that some of the variations were really crazy, and Alireza definitely prepared for them at home, but Magnus just avoided all of them and traded down into this endgame, and Firouzja didn't really give him any opportunities to exploit in this very nice line that he prepared. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We're gonna keep covering this tournament as there are more games to be seen. Niepo versus Karjakin did not happen today. Their game will be finished at some other point. I don't know why it was delayed. Probably someone had some problems, but I will keep you guys informed. So once again, hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank happy 40th birthday Nemo, David Marcus, John Rabbits, F. Lightheart, and Suhasuraja Chandragupta for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of this very nice tournament, checking up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.